so that I can share with people. We're going to just give folks another minute to filter in. All right, there's Lynn. Hi, Lynn. Hi, Helen. Yeah. That's okay, y'all. No worries about being off camera. I know it's dinner time, and again, I know folks have probably maybe been on more than one Zoom call today. So yeah, feel free to, I love seeing your faces, y'all. This is my favorite space, actually. Like, it feels great to see you all. And also don't feel obligated to be on camera if you don't want to, and come on and off. Yeah, no, Zoom fatigue is totally a real thing. Let's see. Lynn, would you mind if I made you a co-host and you could let people in? Because as we all know, I'm not the best at having my attention. That way maybe I won't keep pausing while I'm talking.
I am totally fine to be co-host and admit people into the space as long as I can do that off camera so I can eat dinner.
Yeah, everybody, honestly, I feel like we're having a dinner party. Thank you all for being here. We should have just put that in the invitation. Bring dinner. Okay, I'm trying to find you. Lynn, I lost you. I'm trying to find you.
I'm right here.
You're here. It's in alphabetical order. Still be folks still I think why happening?
Can
there you are.
I
got you. I got you. It was just jumping around for some reason. Okay. Okay. So yeah, so you can let people in and we will get started. Oh, I should also share my screen so you can see the slides. Give me a second and we will really get started. Would someone also, as I'm chatting, just like keep an eye on the chat and stop me if I need, if there's like, feel free to y'all talk in the chat, but if there's anything I need to see, like I said, I'm not good at the whole like watching the chat and talking. So, oh, there's a great question in the chat, which I will address now. There is a mailing list that you can subscribe that is specifically for AOTL NC. It is different than just the All on the Line National sends emails as well. While we have a special guest here who's going to talk about litigation, Arthur Mitchell. I keep calling him Miller because that's what my brain wants to say, even though I know his name. And so while you're talking, I'll find the mailing list link. Thank you for asking that question. Let me share my screen. This is the part of the video that I'm going to wish I would take the time to edit out of me just like vamping, but I won't. So it is what it is. Okay. Welcome, everyone. It's nice to see you all. Thank you for being here. This is the All on the Line North Carolina November statewide meeting, our post-election meeting. I see a lot of new faces. I see a lot of familiar faces. Welcome, everyone. If you are new to the space, All on the Line is a 501c4 campaign designed to bring together citizens across a range of issues to win on redistricting, to raise awareness about how gerrymandering harms policymaking, and to create and encourage activities that defend our democratic ideals. And we have a lot of work to do in that area still in North Carolina. So I'm really glad to see you all here. Our agenda for tonight, we're going to do an election recap. And then Mr. Mitchell is going to give us a litigation update. And then we'll talk about the congressional map redraw that is coming in North Carolina. And then we'll talk about some upcoming events and kind of what's on the horizon in the more immediate future. And then at the end, we'll just have some open forum time if folks want to ask questions or chat or anything. So that's or jump off if you actually want to go eat your dinner. That's fine too. So we'll get started. This meeting is being recorded. Love to have you on camera. Also fine if you don't want to be on camera. If you would all introduce yourselves in the chat, I'd love to invite you to put your name and your preferred pronouns in the chat, also where you're coming in from. And any organizational affiliations, if you're here, if you're a part of an organization or you're here, as yourself or as part of an organization, you're welcome to just lift up any organizations that you're part of into the space. We love to see it. All right. Let me see here. I can do this. Okay, cool. So I'm gonna also, we're gonna re-up our old poll that we like to have, that just because I like to see the visual and it's fun to take a poll, I guess. So we've got on the screen, we've just got the state kind of divided into, I think, 8 regions, and folks and we'd love to just fill out the poll and mark where you're joining from, or if you are like not in the place that you consider home or where your community is, you can put that place if you want. And just for a little fun trivia, these districts are actually the NC Department of Public Instruction district. So it's like how the public education system splits up the state, which I thought was interesting and a good way for us to do it. I'll leave the poll up for just another. Oh, wait, 100% of you have answered? That's incredible.
Well, I can't answer because I'm like you. I have special ninja co-host powers.
Okay,
so throw another in the triangle. Woo!
Is in the triangle. All right, so we'll end the poll and share the results because that's awesome. We've got people from all over the state and outside of the state. So thank you all, except for we don't have anybody from Northeastern North Carolina or the Outer Banks this time, but sometimes we do. So, all right, we'll stop sharing that. Did it go away for you? Do you all still have a poll in front of you? Yeah. Or are you good? Okay. All right, so we are going to talk a little bit about the election now. I first want to just thank everyone because I know there are a lot of people on this call who did a lot of work in the election, both with All on the Line. Folks affiliated, our y'all volunteers and partners and members. We as a group sent 4,000 handwrote and mailed 4,000 postcards to voters in Guilford County, to make sure that folks understood the stakes of these elections for their fair congressional districts. We also texted early voting info to over 200,000 infrequent voters in North Carolina in competitive districts so that they would know where to go to vote early. That's something that not everybody knows. And so we were able to track and see that over 2,300 people actually clicked the link to find their early voting site. So that was great. And yeah, I see some reactions of people who helped with that. And it was good. And it was a lot of fun to have those text banks and be together, and appreciate everybody who worked on that. We also partnered with Pro-Choice North Carolina on some phone banks, calling voters who have an interest in, the fact that abortion was on the ballot, abortion access was on the ballot this year in North Carolina, although not quite maybe as clearly as in some other states, but it was, and we wanted to make sure people knew that. So thank you to Lynn, who's here, and also everybody who joined those phone banks. And then we also did partnered with some folks on this call and groups, including the New North Carolina Project and Indivisible groups and other orgs on some educational forums and events to, raise awareness and educate voters about the importance of the judicial races. So I also know that, there's people here who ran for office, served as poll workers, and just really appreciate all the work that everybody did. So thank you. The kind of the results, these are not like final, but these are the, where things stand right now. I say that because there are a couple of House districts in North Carolina that have not been officially called. But these are the, we know that that Sherry Beasley lost the Senate race to Ted Budd. These are the sort of map adjacent results that I wanted to lift up for folks. And I think the thing that I noticed about the results was that the maps really perform the way they were designed. We had a congressional map that was that the original map that was drawn was ruled to be an unconstitutional partisan gerrymander, and it was redrawn by a court. It was a fair map. It wasn't a perfect map, but it's a very fair map. It had 2 swing districts. We expected there to be a delegation that looked kind of like North Carolina, and that was exactly what we got, right? So in the election, there was, North Carolina voters voted about, very close to 50-50. The Senate race was, I think, the 4th closest in the country. And the map, we elected on this map, we elected 7 Democrats and 7 Republicans to Congress. So that's actually a huge win. I mean, that's the first time that's happened in North Carolina. We should all be really happy about that, that that we're sending a delegation that actually looks, is partisan balanced and looks like the way people in North Carolina vote. Another note I will say is that I don't know if this is the first time ever. I haven't actually looked at the history, but very excited that there are going to be 3 of our Congress people in North Carolina. We have 3 Black Congress people members of Congress going to Congress from North Carolina, Alma Adams and Don Davis and Valerie Foushee, which is awesome. And then we have, the Senate map was still, it's still gerrymandered. And Republicans, it was drawn to benefit Republicans, and it did. There was a 30 Republicans, 20 Democrats, Republican supermajority. That is 60% of the seat. That means that Republicans will hold 60% of the seats, even though they got 52% of the vote statewide. The North Carolina House map has you've probably heard that was 1 seat shy. Republicans were 1 seat shy of a supermajority in the North Carolina House. That seat was won by like 420 some odd votes. It's not actually been called yet, but it was a very, very close race. We'll talk a little bit more about this. There was actually several House seats that were decided by less than 1,000 votes. Statewide turnout was 50.4. Well, it's probably gone up a little bit actually, because the votes are still being counted like, provisional ballots and things, but about 50.54% was statewide turnout. Just to compare that to 2018 was 52.98% and 2020 was 75.35%. This is what the congressional map looks like after the election. We kind of, put this map together today. So it'll get prettier, but this is what the congressional map looks like now. And I think we should all just take a minute and appreciate that we have a balanced congressional map, and it performed, it elected a delegation that actually reflects North Carolina, which I'm really excited about. This is the Senate map. Again, just to reiterate, there were, the map, when it was drawn, we kind of expected that there were 18 seats that were likely to be won by Democrats, 28 seats that were likely to be won by Republicans, and 4 that were kind of considered toss-ups. Of the toss-ups, Republicans won 2 and Democrats won 2, but 2 was enough for the Republicans to win a supermajority. The ones that Republicans won are Senate District 3 in northeastern North Carolina and 7 in New Hanover County. And the ones that Democrats won were 17 in Southern Wake County, and 18 in Northern Wake and Granville County. my Wake County folks are cheering. And then this is the House map. Again, you know, it was performed pretty much like you would have expected. There were a couple of, this was the map where the thing that I just want to point out is that, you know, there were several seats that were really, really close. The seat that was, the Republicans flipped a seat in Pitt County where Brian Farkas lost to a Republican opponent by 462 votes. The seat in, there's a seat in Vance and Granville that was decided by 765 votes. Ricky Hurtado in Alamance County, I know a lot of folks know him. He lost by 658 votes. These are votes might still be changing a little bit. Christy Clark in North Mech, that was decided by 661 votes. So there's just a lot of really close races. And then of course, in Cabarrus County, Diamond State and Williams was a Democrat who won that one seat that prevented a Republican supermajority, and that was by 425 votes. So just a little bit of map trivia for folks that are into that sort of thing. I'm going to now, we're going to pass it over to Arthur Mitchell, who is the Deputy Director of Litigation and Policy at the National Redistricting Foundation. We've got a couple of cases still. One is still kind of has been litigated, I guess, and we're waiting on a decision. And then there's a big case that's out of North Carolina going to the Supreme Court of the United States next month, and really appreciate you being here to talk about those. Thank you.
Of course, and thank you, Bree, for that introduction. And good evening, everyone. Like Bree said, my name is Arthur Mitchell. I'm Deputy Director of Litigation and Policy for the National Redistricting Foundation. The National Redistricting Foundation, or the NRF, is a 501c3 affiliate of the All on the Line project, of which Bree is an illustrious and strong member of. So I'm here to give you a little bit of a litigation recap of all of the redistricting related cases that deal with the Tar Heel State. And those are two cases in particular. One is called Harper versus Hall, and another one is Moore versus Harper. And I know it's a little confusing because both of those cases contain the name Hall, or excuse me, Harper. See, I'm messing it up. But I'll just make it a little bit easier for you to understand. The Harper v. Hall case is the case that is in the North Carolina Supreme Court. So when we start with Harper, that's in the North Carolina Supreme Court. When we start with Moore v. Harper, the Moore case is in the United States Supreme Court. So I'll give you a brief overview about these two cases, and then I'll talk specifically about Harper versus Hall and then Moore versus Harper. So the Harper case before the North Carolina Supreme Court, that is a case that involves various redistricting disputes under North Carolina law. Voters challenged North Carolina's 2021 redistricting plans for the Congress, for the Senate, and the House. When those went through, the North Carolina Supreme Court ruled that these maps were unconstitutional partisan gerrymanders, which was significant. Over many years, the National Redistricting Foundation and other partners like Common Cause and the League of Conservation Voters have been going to court hoping to get some sort of indication that what the legislature was doing violated North Carolina Constitution and the rights of North Carolinians. And this was a huge victory for all voters, no matter your political stripe. So in that aftermath, the court asked the legislature to try to redraw under the rule that the court set out. The legislature failed, and the court had experts draw maps that would be used for this election, the congressional map for this election. And the legislative leaders appealed the decision of the court to use the special master's congressional maps. And the Harper plaintiffs, which are supported by the National Redistricting Foundation, appealed the court's adoption of the state Senate map. And the League of Conservation Voters appealed the state Senate map as well. And Common Cause appealed the state House and state Senate maps. So there are a bunch of different parties filing a bunch of different appeals on all of the maps, basically saying that they didn't meet the standard that the Supreme Court laid out. Oral argument on this case was heard, seems like a million years ago, but it was really just a month ago. And there were some significant arguments about whether or not the legislative leaders could drop their appeal of the case, because there was another case before the US Supreme Court, which I'm going to talk about in a second, that they didn't want the North Carolina Supreme Court to mess up for them. And also a discussion about like what this impact would mean for future redistricting, because although we recently had an election on these maps, more maps need to be redrawn. And what does that mean for the rights of North Carolinians to have and live in under fair maps and vote under fair maps? So it is my understanding, it is my hope that the North Carolina Supreme Court will issue a ruling on this case before the end of this calendar year, because as Bree noted earlier, there has been a change in the makeup of the North Carolina Supreme Court with noted pro-gerrymanders who have been able to win elections, so they will become justices of the court. And so it is unclear whether or not they will have the same mindset for fair maps and democracy as the current justices do. So that's Harper versus Hall. So if we go to the next slide, we'll talk a little bit about Moore versus Harper. So Moore versus Harper is about the North Carolina legislative leaders challenging the state court's ability to invoke the state constitution to throw out the legislature's gerrymandered map. So as I mentioned earlier, the North Carolina Supreme Court threw out the legislature's gerrymandered congressional map, and the legislative leader says, well, we think that that's wrong. We think that state courts shouldn't stop us from violating the state constitution because of a phrase in the US Constitution that some people, some radical thinkers, not radical in a good way, but radical thinkers mean that only the state legislature can regulate federal elections. This theory is called the independent state legislature theory, where the proponents of this theory claim that the framers of our US Constitution use of the word legislature in the elections clause of the Constitution means that only state legislatures have exclusive control on federal elections without any accountability from the other branches of state government, without the checks and balances that are codified in state laws, or in defiance of the principles enshrined in state constitutions like the Free Elections Clause or the Equal Protection Clause or the Free Speech Clause. Those clauses were the bases for the North Carolina Supreme Court to throw out those gerrymandered maps. And the legislative leader says, hey, those constitutional provisions don't mean anything here because of what the US Constitution says. It's a very radical theory. So, excuse me, this case is being briefed currently before the US Supreme Court, which means all of the parties involved are filing their arguments for the Supreme Court to consider before they make their decision. There's been a significant number of amicus briefs that have been filed. So amicus briefs are friend of the court briefs. Those are briefs filed by individuals and organizations with a public interest in the case, but they themselves are not a party. So those briefs can offer like a different perspective, different arguments to the justices, or even analysis to help them come to a decision. So in this case, the Moore v. Harper case, 69 amicus briefs were filed from various groups. Of those 69 briefs, 16 of them were filed in support of the North Carolina Republican leaders. 48 of them were filed in support of the Harper voters. So you can kind of get a sense of the balance of people who are saying to the Supreme Court, like, you really, really need to think about this. This is very, very significant. So I'll just give you a couple of quotes for some of the notable amicus briefs that have been filed. I'll read one now. The independent state legislature theory deprives states of any ability to enact meaningful checks and balances on congressional redistricting to prevent harmful gerrymanders that prioritize partisan advantage or incumbent protection. It's very eloquent language from the governor himself, Arnold Schwarzenegger, former Republican governor of California, who filed a brief attacking this theory, this ISL theory, as radical and dangerous. Another statement is that this basic starting point, this concept that state legislatures were creatures of state constitutions, creatures whose very existence and shape derive from state constitutions, is enough to defeat ISL. This is coming from a brief filed by Stephen G. Calabrese, who many people here probably don't know who that is, and that's probably a good thing, but this person is the co-chairman of the board of directors of the Federalist Society. The Federalist Society is a strongly conservative organization that influenced former President Donald Trump to pick the Supreme Court justices who currently sit on the court. So that's Justice Barrett, Justice Kavanaugh, Justice Gorsuch. This person, who I should actually clarify, Stephen Calabrese had to rescind his title as co-chairman of the board of directors for the Federalist Society, probably because he signed on to a brief that said that ISL theory is bad and wrong. So we're seeing radical theorists support this outlandish theory only to nullify the checks and balances that protect a whole host of rights, including the right to vote. And not just for North Carolinians, but for people throughout the country. So I belabor the point. There's a whole lot of paper in front of the justices right now to convince them that they should rule against the North Carolina legislative leaders' attempt to do an end around the North Carolina Constitution. So oral argument on that case is Wednesday, December 7th. So I think Bree probably has some information about efforts to get people rallied within the Tar Heel State, and also people traveling to our nation's capital to bring public awareness to this very important case, and to hopefully convince enough justices on the court to do the right thing and to throw this thing out. I could say a whole lot more about this. This is a very important case. It's not the only important case before the court this year. A few have already been argued, but it's something that generates from North Carolina and has a significant impact throughout the country. So I guess I'll pause here to see if there are any questions in the chat that I can answer, or I'll turn it back over to you, Bree.
Does anybody have any questions? So there's one question in the chat from Angie. So the amicus briefs were written specifically addressing Moore v. Harper. Yes.
Yes, that's right. So when you file an amicus brief, you can file in support of the petitioners. In this case would be the Republican legislative leaders in North Carolina, or in support of the respondents, which encompasses the Harper plaintiffs, which the National Redistricting Foundation support, Common Cause, and the League of Conservation Voters of North Carolina. Or you can file in support of neither party, which 5 folks did. And those 5 briefs kind of split between, some of them were in favor of the respondents, like the good side, and a couple were in favor of, kind of like, if you read between the lines, like, okay, they say they're not in support of either party, but they're really in support of it. So yes, you have to file kind of in support of one of the parties or neither parties, but I think I told you the breakdown, something like, 48 of 69 of the briefs were filed in support of the respondents, our side.
And I know you have to go, but if you have time for just one more 30-second question. Lynn was asking about there was an amicus brief that was filed by like a consortium of all the state Supreme Court judges.
Yes, there was. This was kind of a significant thing, because what these justices said is that we represent the highest courts in the land throughout the country. And this is an organization that has people who are nonpartisan, because in some states you can run to be justice on your court without having to affiliate with a party. And then a lot of states, you have to associate with a political party to become a judge. So they run the political spectrum. They run the gamut. They're saying that this is a dangerous theory, because it would essentially take away state courts' ability to enforce state constitutional rights and protections on a very small subset, but very important body of law, which is like federal election law. So that's a very radical thing that even like Republican judges and justices of high courts are saying this is a bad idea. So this is not something that this organization, this conference of chief justices, they don't get involved that often in Supreme Court's briefings, because often they are part of it. But this is one of those situations where they felt it was necessary to inform the justice of the U.S. Supreme Court that this needs to go away, and quickly.
Okay. We're going to respect your time now. We've gone 2 minutes over when I said I would keep you, but thank you so much for being here. That was super interesting and helpful. And you will be getting an invitation to attend our December meeting to help us understand how things went.
Yes. Well, I'm happy to be here. And I just want to say one last thing, if I could take the liberty to speak. So one of the things I want to keep folks and want people to keep in mind is that the decision by the North Carolina Supreme Court in Harper versus Hall, that decision may influence what the United States Supreme Court does in Moore versus Harper. Because in North Carolina, it's the North Carolina Supreme Court that has the final say on what North Carolina law means. And the North Carolina law, like the Free Elections Clause of the Constitution, the Equal Protection Clause, and the Free Speech and Assembly Clause, those three clauses are what invalidated the maps that were drawn by the legislative leaders just last year. So if the North Carolina Supreme Court says, yep, this is what North Carolina law means, the US Supreme Court should really think hard and long about that, because there's really no other source of what North Carolina law means except for the North Carolina Supreme Court. So the timing of this is very unique, it's very strange, but there might be a cascading effect where the North Carolina Supreme Court speaks, that'll inform the Supreme Court, and they'll finally speak, and that might inform what the legislators do in the short session next year when they have to redraw these maps. So with that, I will leave it to you, and it was good to be with you all this evening.
So can we just actually, thank you, but just, this will be like a very short answer, but I think it's an interesting question. If the Harper Hall decision doesn't come down before, I guess, the court term ends or before the Supreme Court hears the case, will that have to be re-argued?
My understanding is no. So this decision in Harper versus Hall, if that's delayed somehow, to be quite frank with you, I'm not quite sure what the procedure would be in North Carolina law if for some reason the court doesn't issue a ruling, but the likelihood of it being re-argued is very, very slim. Like I'd say very, very, very slim. And I just opened up the chat just because I love questions, and I see that someone asked, according to the U.S. Constitution, Congress can by law direct how congressional districts are created. It is true that under the Elections Clause, the Congress can be the final decider on how congressional districts are created. In fact, it is under that authority that the Freedom to Vote Act and the For the People Act, its predecessor, was drafted. So HR 1, legislation that was introduced in the Congress, would basically eliminate partisan gerrymandering for congressional elections. So if that bill were to become federal law, that would basically make this issue moot. Republicans, Democrats in any state couldn't gerrymander anymore, couldn't do partisan gerrymandering. So goodness gracious, that would be wonderful. And we hope that even in the waning days of the party who introduced that bill being in power, maybe there's some hope. I'm a dreamer. Maybe there's some hope that they can do something about it, because this issue is not going to go away anytime soon. So anyway, I'll stop talking now. Have a good night, all.
You have to have hope. Thank you so much for being here and for sharing your knowledge. Good night. Helen, I see your comment in the chat, and I know we have some internal stuff where Art has like written all this down, and I'll see if we can come up with something that is shareable, and I'll also look around for, I think there are some resources, especially about the Moore v. Harper. That's been written about pretty extensively. The kind of connection between the two isn't something that national media at least sort of seems to get into as much. Yes, love the comments. Nonpartisan commissions. There is work being done in North Carolina. There has been work done in North Carolina in the past, and it is ongoing to advocate for a nonpartisan commission, redistricting commission. Yeah, thanks, Helen. I appreciate that comment. So I think I'm sure there are folks on this call who are well aware of the advocacy work around a nonpartisan commission, but I will share any places that folks can plug into that as it happens. I think there was, everyone needed to know what was happening with the election to figure out how to go forward in advocating for that. Okay, so is there anything, feel free to unmute if there's anything in the chat that, so Angie, you had put a question in the chat. What do we know of the two newly elected judges? I assume you're talking about the state Supreme Court, which I kind of glossed over earlier in my haste to try to get through to Art before he had to leave. Yes, the Republicans swept the judicial elections, and on the Supreme Court, that does mean that there will be a Republican majority on the Supreme Court until 2028. So we'll all just take a drink of our wine or whatever we're drinking, and and as far as what we know about them, I mean, we know that I can't remember their names. Somebody,
one of them is named Dietz. I think one of them is named Dietz. I don't remember the other guy.
Yeah. So, and he really ran. He really tried to run as a nonpartisan person, and we don't actually know a ton about him. His resume was very similar to Lucy Inman, who was the Democrat that was running. And he doesn't there wasn't a lot of background research. I keep wanting to call the other one newbie, but he's the Trey Allen.
Yeah, Trey Allen. I was gonna, yeah.
So Allen,
Karen beat me to it.
Yeah, thanks. So Trey Allen, I mean, other folks may want to jump in the chat or here, but Trey Allen was I think the counsel for the Supreme Court, because he's connected with Newby, they're, simpatico, they're on the same team. Newby wanted him to get elected. It was, there's stuff out there you can find where he kind of campaigned for him and had brought him in, fired someone who was in that position for a long time to bring in Trey Allen to, work for the court. And now he's on the court. Never been a judge before. So yeah, it's going to be a very right-wing court. I mean, they ran unabashedly as conservative judges, and you saw all this Republican literature about conservative judges, and that I didn't see that from the other side. I think that the Democrats tried to run as independent and not partisan, and that's what happened. Yeah, great. So folks are answering questions in the chat. I'm gonna
hey Bree, Angie has their hand up. I don't know if they have a question.
You're muted.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Oops. Okay, so my quick question is, and you may have already done this, just so I understand it right, is a conservative court could rule that, oh, sure, Supreme Court, you can rule on whether something's unconstitutional or not, the maps. But at the end of the day, only the legislature can draw the new maps. And so does that just turn into this like game of running out the clock, basically, where the Supreme Court can say, oh, these maps are not good enough. But unfortunately, I think what the legislature is pointing to is they're saying, how dare the Supreme Court draw the new map? We're the only people who can draw the new map. Is that kind of what the argument is going towards? So that practically then, if that's the case, then we cannot get fair maps, because even though a court can rule it unconstitutional, its hands are tied literally as far as being able to draw the new maps. Whereas this go around, they actually, took the bull by the horns and got an independent map master to draw the new maps.
I think that that's right. I don't think that there would be anything preventing the court from doing that again, except that that ideologically, the people who were elected last week are more ideologically aligned with the people who were in the minority before, who basically said in their dissent, we don't think that the court should draw the map. It's up to the legislature to do that.
Right. So ISL right. Talking about that, hopefully you can. So to the short question, and I'm sure you're going to get to it, is there anything we can do as a state or as people to try and impact this decision? Because I feel very helpless. Right?
Yeah. Well, I am gonna talk about that, and we can go ahead and talk about it now. I mean, let's go ahead and let's just have the conversation, right? And maybe I'll just stop sharing, because what the rest of the slides are basically showing the current congressional map and the congressional map we had before, and we can look at those if folks are interested, but I think we can also just have a conversation. So I mean, it's different. I mean, I guess maybe I misunderstood your first question. The ISL, the independent state legislature theory, is in this case, the North Carolina Republicans asking the Supreme Court of the United States to find that this radical theory is correct, that the court cannot oversee anything regarding federal election because of the U.S. Constitution that has this clause that says that it is up to legislatures to just determine the time, place, and manner of elections. Like, I'm not a lawyer, but that sounds bonkers to me. Like, there's no reason that, like, that's what courts do, is they interpret the law and the Constitution. And just because, like, and that doesn't even, the time, place, and manner of elections, like, that is what the court is interpreting. They're not, the Republican argument seems to be that, like, if the court does anything we don't like, they're legislating from the bench, it seems like. But to get to so that the ISL is like it's its own thing. And there's a lot of different ways that decision could come down, and we are going to have to wait and see what SCOTUS says and what it means. And as Arthur was alluding, like, the North Carolina Supreme Court, what they say about the current litigation that's still before them should impact the Supreme Court. So, like, it's all pretty convoluted, right? It's all pretty, complicated and convoluted. But in terms of, like, so the next piece that we were going to talk about is kind of like what's happening now. And so that's what we'll get to. And y'all should be reading the chat, because, like, there's a lot of smart people in the chat who are asking questions and answering things. And I don't want to be reading everything, but we can keep having the conversation. If you want, raise your hand if there's something that you want me to address in the room. But I think what I'm going to say about the congressional redraw, there is going to be a redraw of the congressional map. Obviously, the current makeup of the Supreme Court does not appear to be like inclined to protect the rights of voters to have, free and fair elections by having substantially equal voting power. I don't think that means that there's nothing we can do or that we shouldn't still fight for it. One thing I'll say is, I remember when I first started at this job having a very similar conversation in this space of like, well, like Republicans are going to do what the politicians, they have all the power, they're going to do what they want to do. And we fought it really hard. We fought it like with our grassroots power. I mean, we did a lot of work turning people out to make their statements at public hearings. We had people when they were redrawing the first time, a lot of folks on this call and a lot of other folks, we had people calling legislators every single day, asking them what's going on, why aren't you being transparent, like where are the maps, what are you doing? And I think that there's a lot that we can do to influence the process. And I think we have to do that. We have to try, because the people deserve fair maps, and we have to keep fighting for them, is what I would say to that. The court is the court, but we also, one thing we have now that we didn't have before is a pretty landmark Supreme Court ruling affirming that people have a right to vote on fair maps, to not have their voting power substantially, diluted, or that people should have substantially the same voting power regardless of where they live. So, or what party they're part of. So, all we can do is fight the good fight, is what I'll say. And
I have a question.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So if the North Carolina Supreme Court makes that decision, and of course now the composition of the court is going to change next year, the question is, can that decision be revisited? How much does the precedent of this year's court influence future courts if they get another request, to gerrymander, basically?
Well, I mean, I'm not a lawyer, so, but I don't know that anybody, like, my understanding is that, especially state Supreme Courts, that it is totally within their right to overturn precedent, that they can make a different ruling. I mean, yes, that is true. And Trey Allen basically said as much when he was campaigning. I mean, he essentially said, courts can overturn their own precedent. Yeah. So, I mean, that is true.
Yeah. So given that we have a gerrymandered legislature in North Carolina, and gerrymandering is kind of like a vicious cycle where, once it's in place, it's hard to get rid of it because they continually redraw in their own favor every 10 years. The only way that other states have been able to get rid of that is by having some kind of citizen initiative where they can put an initiative on the ballot, and then the citizens can overrule the legislature. And we don't have that in North Carolina. So I'm wondering then if the alternative next best solution, in my view, would be to lobby the federal legislature, the U.S. Congress, because they can create a law that would in fact require every state in the union to have an independent, nonpartisan commission do all the redistricting every 10 years. And we have a better chance, I think, of getting that passed through the U.S. Congress than we do in the North Carolina legislature, my opinion.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I tweeted that exact thing like 2 days ago, that I think that we should be like, that's what if I was in charge, that's what the Congress would do in the lame duck. Because I think you're right. And everyone thinks I should be in charge, right? No, I think you're right. I mean, I think that that's a correct analysis of like how we, what a strategy looks like to get you know, to deal with gerrymandering. One of the strategies. Yeah, people are putting great stuff in the chat. I would say that, well, just to close the loop, I do want to say one more thing about the Supreme Court. It is possible, and it is within their right and their purview to overturn recent precedent. However, it is also extremely partisan move. And, you know, we don't know what's in the minds of these judges. But I think that if they go in and immediately start overturning all of the recent precedent, like that they've just done, first of all, like there are certain, in our cases, you know, the redistricting is a different case because it's going to come up again soon. But I've heard this from in other spaces as well, that like, oh, this is in danger, but like they can't just like, they have to have a case in front of them to overturn recent precedent. And like, you know, they are supposed to respect precedent. They're supposed to have a reason to overturn it, right? It's not just like, you know, it shouldn't be partisan. So I think it's just, I just want to caution against the like total defeatism of saying, oh, well, they're terrible and they're going to do whatever they want. And it's like, well, no, like there needs to be pushback. There needs to be someone saying, actually, this is not the way it's supposed to work. This is not the way we want it to work. And at the same time, I think it's correct to have a strategy for how you actually deal with partisan gerrymandering, because the other thing is North Carolinians don't like it. And that's bipartisan, you know, like we don't like having to do this constantly. Lots of stuff going on in the chat. So it's at 6:52. Do y'all want to see the previous, like the current map and the previous map? I think, or just keep chatting. It's like hard to get a sense. I'm gonna, let's see. Yeah, okay, keep chatting. I'm gonna share my screen again and just kind of as a reminder, show you the map that we have that's going to be redrawn. And okay, cool, both. And then just sort of share what, so this is the map that we voted on in this previous election. The two seats that were really competitive, Democrats won, and that's how we got a 7-7 delegation. This is the map that the court drew, so it will be redrawn. I was kind of like, do we have to redraw the map? Like, can we just push them to keep the map? But apparently, it's like it will be redrawn. This is also not a perfect map, but it at least was like partisan balanced, and you know, it's better than the map that that they initially drew, which is this map. And I wanted to just show this because I think that we need to be thinking about, you know, specifically what they're going to do and how we're going to push back. You know, basically every map that they offered, they gerrymandered the state in the same way. They bust up the large metro areas and put them with very rural areas. So thinking about like what that actually looks like for representation for people, either you get someone who like lives in Mecklenburg County representing people who live in McDowell County or Rutherford County, or what, you know, you have people who live in these urban areas and they're being represented with people who live in very rural areas, and there's just different interests. So they're likely to do that. They're going to bust up Mecklenburg, Wake, Guilford, and also the Sandhills. So I think we should start, you know, I'm starting to think about that. And the last thing I wanted to just let everybody on this call know and just kind of put on your radar. So as Arthur mentioned, the Moore v. Harper arguments are December 7th. And there are going to be some rallies, some events in North Carolina. And I just got like this information today. There's a group that's been planning them, including Southern Coalition for Social Justice and Common Cause. And so if you're on those lists, you'll also get this information, but I will send out as soon as we have it. They are looking for people to help, you know, set up rallies and events to raise awareness about this, and they're planning them. So there's going to be one in Raleigh on Tuesday, December 6th in the morning. And then people are going to get on a bus to go to DC to be at the oral arguments on the 7th. And then there's a plan for an event in Greenville on December 7th. Oh, these are all December 7th, the day that the oral arguments are heard. There's going to be events in Greenville, Greensboro, Charlotte, and Asheville. So if you are near any of those places, if you want to plug into this work, let me know. I'll drop my my email in the chat in case anybody doesn't have it. And also, so yeah, send me an email. What yeah, and I'll connect you with the folks that are organizing all of these, and I'll be at the one in Raleigh. But yes, Beth.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. This is kind of it's hard to ask this question in the chat. So for those of us, I'm sort of a data nerd. And for those of us who would like to just see what goes into, let's say, an independent commission drawing a map, like I have no idea how, what that process is like, because in theory, if you draw a completely fair map, every district would be 50-50, or do you know what I mean? Like, I don't know what's the mathematical principle that they use to draw them, other than, I mean, obviously you can tell, like, I know how to see a gerrymandered map because obviously they've got, everything kind of travels around in weird directions, but then I don't know, I would like to learn more about what goes into drawing a map. And I know a lot of people really don't care or on that level.
That's a great question. No, I mean, so this kind of actually gets to my next the last thing I wanted to say, which is, like, I'm thinking about what kinds of events, both virtual and in person, we should be doing to engage people, like at least raise awareness about what is going on, what is happening, and why it matters. And so I think, like, if folks are interested in a like super in the weeds, data heavy kind of like, how does districting actually work? Like, that's a great idea. It might be a small group, but that's good. That's fine. It would be, and also, like, yeah. Okay. Sorry. What did you say?
Yeah.
That would be good. Okay.
Because I tried following it. There was a couple years ago, they even had it. It was such a contentious thing that they showed the NCGA meeting and, arguing these different maps. And I really tried to follow it, but I don't even know if they understood some of them making the arguments. I don't know if they understood the math or they just didn't like how the results would turn out.
I mean,
for them.
Yeah. And one of the things, like, if you watch any of the trial, like, there's all kinds of crazy math that goes into determining. And that's kind of one of the Republican arguments, is that, like, it's really hard to figure out if a map is fair and there's no clear, like, mathematical, like, subjective line you can draw. So we can't possibly do anything about it, is basically their argument. And, I think that it is also true that there is some subjectivity to what is a fair map, like, you're never going to get everybody to agree that a map is fair, but there's certainly, like, and the court, in their opinion, like, listed, like, these are the metrics that we're going to look at to determine if the map is, like, within our parameters of an acceptable, like, not an extreme like a fair map.
Right. I can look at Ohio and I can say, oh yeah, like, you don't even need math to see the way their districts are drawn. It's not a natural. They have this one district that is still just weaves all over the map, and that's
for where?
Ohio, I think.
Oh yeah, Ohio.
Well, Ohio's a disaster too.
Yeah, so I mean, I know how to spot one, but I don't know how to spot Yeah,
and I mean, you honestly too, like, you can't always spot them, right? Like a map can look fine and actually be pretty gerrymandered. And this is the thing about gerrymandering or like redistricting is not a perfect, like it's not easy. It is subjective. It's not always clear. But these, those are my thing is, I wish we were having real conversations about like, what does representation do and who should be represented together and what communities need to be represented together and why, and like, how does the government work? Like how are,
why are the people who are being elected drawing the districts that are going to elect them? That's a big question. But anyway, yeah, if you do have some sort of data heavy presentation, cool. I'd definitely be interested.
So what I'm going to ask for folks to do is when you get if you have ideas, if you have, I see some, I'll save the chat. And also if you have ideas about like events that would be helpful that you think people would be interested in, that will, just anything that will bring people into like understanding this, because I think it's really foundational to like how our democracy works, that we should consider around this redraw. You're going to get a survey, and I think it's going to come to your phone. It's pretty easy. So feel free to like put your comment in there if you have ideas or like events you'd like to see. I saw some comments about like, we did some regional work last year. We'll definitely be looking. I see folks are also like, I totally thank you for being here. I want to say it's 7. I'm going to hang out and chat a little longer, but it's also 7 and I know folks need to jump too. So thank you all for being here. And I'm going to stop sharing my screen as well. I didn't finish going through the events, but we're kind of doing it. That's basically what it is like, I'm trying to figure out what events are going to be most helpful.
And Bree, Michelle has their hand raised.
Yeah, thanks, Michelle. You've had your hand raised.
Yeah, so what I'm remembering about the process is that there were some people who actually did some maps. They took the criteria that was in the state constitution, and they did some samples of maps based on that criteria. Mm-hmm. And so I would think that Beth might want to just find out, and I don't know if you know who those people were, but why not reach out to them directly and say, I feel like they were, I don't know if they were from a math school, like one of like Duke or something. And so, it seems like the answer to finding out more about that is to just go directly to those people and ask what they did.
You don't remember who was it? It might have been Duke.
Yeah, I don't remember, but how can we find out? Because I remember that there were, in this process, there were definitely people who said, look, here's some maps. Here's they computer generated several maps that addressed all the key things that were in the state constitution.
I do think I remember this. And that's actually a whole other, I think that's a whole other like fight that I would like to, yeah. Jonathan Mattingly at Duke. And yep. I do remember that article. Yeah. I think that's a great idea. And like having, cause it's obvious that like, there is a way to do this that's fair and that everyone would broadly agree is fair if you're not, just a purely like partisan power person. I think that's one of the other things that's interesting to me is like, they're not even arguing that. Yeah, I think someone dropped the link in the chat. Thank you, Beth. They're not even arguing that the maps, like the current maps are unfair. Like they're just arguing that they didn't draw them and that they're not gerrymandered. Like that's the rationale for redrawing. But I think the other thing to keep in mind, I think it's really important, like that article is great. Thinking about how it works and how you can do it fairly is great, but it's also like, there does need to be a component of whatever we do that is like directly holding the people who are going to do this accountable. because it doesn't seem like they actually care about being fair. Like they're saying that they do, but it's clear that they don't. And they're not even really trying very hard to make the case that like it's good for democracy, or it's good for the state, or it's good for voters, or it's fair. They're just, you know, doing what they need to do to retain power. And so I think that that's got to be part of it. It's like, it's not just like, oh no, we can't, it's possible to draw fair maps. Like everyone knows it's possible to draw fair maps. It's just the will.
Yeah. Bree, actually, a couple of years ago, when they were working on redrawing the maps, one of the Republicans on the committee said straight out, the reason we have a map that's 10 Republicans and 4 Democrats is because we couldn't draw one that was 11 Republicans and 3 Democrats.
Right. Exactly.
That was a justification. And so, and he said further, we think that Republican policy is best for the people of North Carolina, and that's why we're drawing a map that gives Republicans a huge advantage. So there was no attempt at all to be bipartisan or split the state evenly between political parties. It was just pure power play. Right.
Or even to draw districts that made sense just for the constituents.
Yeah. Well, there is that issue you mentioned, is how do you decide what does an optimum district look like and an optimum map look like? Because there's so many criteria that go into it, like compactness, competitiveness, split between even split between political parties, communities of interest. So there's a lot of different criteria to juggle.
Well, those were all the criteria that the fair map makers you were bringing the case into court. That's what they put into their computer. They're like, these are the elements we need. And they drew, the computer came up with several options for maps that met all those criteria. That was exactly the exercise that happened. We just got to figure out who did that.
Yeah. I could make an argument that the most important criteria that we should use is competitiveness. Every district should be a competitive district, because then every voter actually has a choice, a voice in who gets elected. Even now with the congressional map we now have, it's accepted that the Republicans have 7 safe seats, the Democrats have 5, and there's only 2 competitive. So everybody in those 12 districts that are not competitive really has no choice, and who represents them. It's going to be whichever party was assigned to win that district.
And then the election is essentially decided in the primary, and that's how you get these like extreme candidates.
When
it's like 10% of the people actually voted the person in.
It can't just be competitiveness though, because then you're going to get, like we have right now with Congressional District 13, where it makes, and I live in Wake County, so I'm a little bit, this hits close to home, a little salty. It makes no sense that a whole chunk of Wake County is in the same congressional district with, which way should I go on the screen? Wayne County, where Goldsboro is. Like, I love Goldsboro. I got friends from there. That's bananas, like, and the in between. And that was drawn because they thought they could win that seat, and they didn't. But so, like, sure, that's competitive, but it makes no sense because it is not like a community, or like, what is the term you use, Bree? Like, people with things in common and
community of interest.
Yeah, thank you. I was like, what's the other word? Like, it's not a community of interest.
Yeah. I mean, so this kind of gets to Beth's point about like, isn't there some like clean mathematical way to do this? And like, this is why this is complicated, is that there actually isn't. I mean, I often hear people too say like, why don't we just let computers do this? And like, we could, but there's real, like kind of just, human element to this, where you actually do want to know the communities that you're affecting and who, like, and it would be great. I mean, in a perfect world, I think you'd actually have people from different communities kind of like engaging in the process to be like, okay, well, this is the area. I one of the things that I thought was great about in the public comment period, I was actually talking to some people from Cumberland County today, and there was a ton of people showed up at the public comment in Cumberland County, and it was on a bipartisan basis. People were saying, we need a district in the Sandhills, and here's why. And they had a bunch of reasons that all made a ton of sense. Like, we share a hospital, like these counties all go to have the same healthcare system. So we should have a federal representative that is, you know, answering to these 5 counties. And people had some different ideas about which counties exactly, but like, to me, like, that's the conversation that we should be having. Like, those are the arguments we should be having. And instead we're unfortunately having these like partisanship arguments. But I think there's like, you can't necessarily just do it. You're going to miss stuff if you just do it by like, have a computer do it. It's like having a computer, you know, like they're going to draw a line like down in the middle of a house or, you know, whatever, which is, they did that in Ohio, but yeah, so this has been a very interesting discussion. Any other, like, I don't want to keep y'all, but I'm actually totally here for this. So like, don't feel bad if you need to jump off. And does anybody else have anything they want to talk about or say? Yeah, literally there was an ad in last year featuring a woman whose house was split into 2 different congressional districts. I mean, they did it in North Carolina. They split a dorm at NC you know, like, yeah, thank you everybody for being here. I see folks are saying bye in the chat, and that's cool. So I think I already said this, but I know I've already talked to some folks on this call about some events. I do think I would like to do some in-person, perhaps even events in, you know, especially in certain parts of the state that are going to be affected by the redraw. And I'm happy to come and talk with any groups, big, small, any groups that want to, you know, talk about this, that want a presentation or just want to have a conversation about how gerrymandering affects their, or redistricting will affect their, affect them. And also looking at some events to kind of highlight the different issues, because, you know, people come into these kinds of spaces around issues like, you know, Lynn, I'd love to talk about like how reproductive justice is going to be impacted by changing the maps, you know, and like I've been having talks with folks who work on healthcare, you know. So if you have ideas, or if you have a group and you want to do any kind of event or engage on this, let me know. And I will send out an email with the recording to this recording, and also a little more information about those dates that I mentioned in the next day or so, or a couple days. All right. It's great to see y'all. Thank you for joining. Got my email. Everyone have a great night. Thank you for being here. We will, I don't know if I said this, I think it was up on the screen. I am planning for the December meeting. I think it's like the 15th or the 16th. And it will come in an email. So thank you all. Have a good night.
Take it easy.
Thanks, Beth. Yeah, I totally, it's not simple, but you know, it's good to keep trying to figure it out. All right. Good night, everybody.